On a quiet January morning in 1997, the city of Richmond, Virginia, awoke like any other day. But by noon, the peace would be shattered forever. Two men, armed and without mercy, stormed a local bank in what would become one of the most brutal and cold-blooded robberies America had ever seen. Innocent lives were torn apart, and the community was left asking one haunting question: why? This is the story of a robbery that escalated into pure chaos, one that would change everything. And it all begins with a single shot that echoes through the streets, leaving behind devastation, heartbreak, and a city desperate for answers. What drove these men to such violence, and how did their actions set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted? This story is full of shocking twists and devastating turns, and many consider it one of America's most ruthless bank heists, so make sure to watch it until the end. On the morning of January 30, 1997, the employees of a small bank located on the east end of Richmond, Virginia, began their day as they would any other. Richmond was known for its relatively low crime rate, averaging around 10 bank robberies per year prior to this fateful day. The community felt safe, with most residents going about their daily routines without a second thought. Among those employees was Christine Edwards, a bright and dedicated 23-year-old teller who arrived early to prepare for the day's business. Her colleague, Tracy Freeman, just 21 years old, was already at her station, setting up the cash drawers and greeting customers with a warm smile. The atmosphere was calm, filled with a gentle hum of conversation and the soft clinking of coins as they were counted. Allison Davis, a customer service representative, was also present, ready to assist clients with their banking needs. Meanwhile, Richard Hartman, the bank's security guard, conducted his usual rounds, ensuring that everything was secure. As the morning progressed, Stephen Reed, a regular customer, walked in just as the tellers finished their preparations. He exchanged pleasantries with Hartman before heading toward the teller's counter. Unknown to them, two men had already slipped into the bank through the rear door, concealed by the mundane bustle of morning life. LaFawn Bobbitt and Rashi Jones were armed and dangerous, their intentions concealed beneath a facade of normalcy. As the clock ticked close to mid-morning, the bank's atmosphere shifted dramatically. Bobbitt and Jones entered with a calculated calmness that belied the chaos about to ensue. They'd walked through the rear door with guns drawn, eyes scanning for potential witnesses and targets. Their movements were swift and deliberate. They had planned this moment meticulously. The first shot rang like thunder in a clear sky, an immediate signal that this was no ordinary robbery. The sound echoed through the small bank as Bobbitt fired into the air to assert dominance over everyone present. "Get down. On the ground," he shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion like a knife. The chaos erupted almost instantly. Screams filled the air as customers and employees alike scrambled for cover. Christine and Tracy were caught off guard as shots rang out, their hearts racing in disbelief at what was unfolding before him. Richard Hartman instinctively moved to protect those inside, but quickly realized he was outgunned. Approximately 80 yards away, Richmond police officers Michael Webb and Dave Martin were enjoying coffee at a nearby convenience store when they heard gunshots echoing from the bank. Their instincts kicked in as they rushed toward the scene, adrenaline pumping through their veins. As they arrived at the bank's entrance, they spotted Richard Hartman lying on the ground outside, wounded but still alive. The officers quickly assessed the situation. "Man down," Officer Martin shouted urgently into his radio as he rushed to check on Hartman's condition. Inside, chaos reigned supreme. The robbers moved with precision, firing shots indiscriminately as they demanded money from terrified tellers. Christine Edwards fell victim to their brutality. Despite her pleas for mercy, she was shot in cold blood. Tracy Freeman watched in horror from her hiding spot under her desk, paralyzed with fear. Outside, Officer Webb took cover behind his patrol car as he prepared to engage with the armed assailants. He knew they were heavily armed and desperate. Every second counted. "I just knew these two were going to come around each side of the vehicle after me," he recalled later. As Officer Martin attempted to provide backup for Webb, he too found himself pinned down by gunfire. The robbers seized this opportunity to escape with a bag full of cash that included a die pack, a device designed to explode upon theft and mark stolen money with red ink. The two men dashed across a nearby cemetery, leaving behind a trail of confusion and fear in their wake. Officer Martin quickly radioed dispatch to report their location. Two men running with black jackets towards Darrowtown Road. But as they leaped over walls and fulled into obscurity, it became clear that capturing them would be no easy feat. Within moments, additional units from Henrico County Police Department arrived on scene as EMT tended to Richard Hartman's wounds. Inside the bank, police officers began clearing rooms one by one, looking for remaining threats while separately typing to assess who had been injured. As they entered the main area where Christine Edwards lay motionless on the floor and Tracy Freeman remained hidden in shock, it became evident that this was not just another robbery. It was an act of calculated violence that would leave lasting scars on all involved. The day that began like any other had morphed into one of terror and tragedy, a stark reminder that even in safe communities like Richmond, violence could erupt without warning or mercy. As the chaos of the robbery subsided, the grim reality of the situation began to unfold. Detectives arrived at the scene, their focus immediately shifting to collecting evidence that could lead them to the perpetrators. The bank was a crime scene, and every detail mattered. Investigators meticulously combed through the area, searching for anything that could provide insight into the actions of LaFawn Bobbitt and Rashi Jones. Among the first pieces of evidence collected were spent shell casings scattered across the floor. Detectives noted a significant number of 9mm rounds, likely fired from a Tech-Nunn semi-automatic weapon. Some casings were unfired, indicating a chaotic struggle where the robbers may have faced weapon malfunctions or simply fired in haste. Each shell was carefully documented and bagged for forensic analysis. Behind the teller's counter, investigators discovered a backpack that had apparently been left behind by robbers. Inside, they found a piece of green tablecloth, a bottle of charcoal lighter fluid, a box of matches, and a note that read, "Please wait 5 minutes." The contents suggested premeditated plans to minimize witnesses and possibly set fire to the bank after the robbery, a chilling indication of their intent. As they continued their search, investigators spotted several boot prints on the teller's counter. Recognizing their potential significance, they preserved each print with tape for later comparison against footwear collected from potential suspects. The meticulous nature of this evidence collection was crucial. It would serve as a foundation for building their case against Bobbitt and Jones. Given that the bank was federally insured, police called in FBI Special Agent Wayne Waddell from the Richmond field office to assist in the investigation. Upon arrival, he and Detective Tom Leonard reviewed surveillance footage captured by multiple cameras positioned throughout the bank. However, they quickly encountered a problem. Something had caused the film to malfunction. The footage jumped erratically from one camera angle to another, making it difficult to piece together a coherent timeline of events. As evidence collection continued for hours, investigators received word of another incident that might be connected to the robbery, a break-in at a nearby house on Art Avenue. This location was not far from where K-9 units had lost track of Bobbitt and Jones earlier that day. While detectives worked tirelessly at the bank, challenges loomed large in gathering witness accounts. The trauma inflicted during the robbery left many victims in shock, complicating efforts to compile accurate testimonies. As the hospital, Richmond detectives sought out wounded victims who could provide crucial information about what transpired inside the bank. Unfortunately, they were met with disappointment. Both Christine Edwards and Tracy Freeman were still undergoing surgery and could not be interviewed. Allison Davis, who had taken cover under her desk during the ordeal, was so distraught that she required heavy sedation just to cope with her fear and anxiety. Meanwhile, Stephen Reed, Another customer who had been grazed by a bullet arrived at the emergency room on his own, but proved to be an unreliable witness due to his battle with Alzheimer's disease, rendering him unable to recall pertinent details about what he had witnessed. By day's end, investigators faced an uphill battle. They had little more than fragmented evidence and no eyewitness accounts to guide them in identifying Bobbitt and Jones. The emotional toll on survivors was palpable, as many struggled with feelings of helplessness and terror in the aftermath of such violence. As detectives regrouped at the end of that harrowing first day, it became clear that this would be a tough case requiring relentless dedication and ingenuity. With limited leads and traumatized witnesses, they understood that time was of the essence if they hoped to bring those criminals to justice before they could strike again. Shortly after the robbery, there was a break-in reported at a house located on Art Avenue, close enough to the cemetery where the robbers had escaped. A young woman living in the house discovered that her front door had been forcefully opened and some of her items were stolen, including clothes. When law enforcement arrived at the scene of the break-in, they found evidence that indicated someone had stepped through the ceiling from above, leading them to suspect that the robbers might have used this location as a hideout or a temporary refuge after fleeing the bank. As detectives interviewed the residents, they were met with confusion and concern. The residents had no idea why their house had been targeted, or was it merely a coincidence that aligned with the timing of the robbery? However, the boyfriend of the homeowner appeared particularly nervous during the investigation, raising potential questions about his involvement or knowledge of the events. Now that the dust had settled, it was time for the investigators to use whatever evidence they had and piece together the crime one moment at a time. They first identified who was inside the bank before the robbery. A security guard, bank representatives, just the one customer, and two other individuals. As the customer had the attention of the security guard, the first gunman bypassed him easily and headed straight to the counter where the teller was. But how can a robber nonchalantly walk by an armed guard when he knows there is backup? That's right. It was the second guy's job to take the guard out, and this was evident on the photos recovered from the scene. The second robber pointing a Tech-9 at the guard. As soon as the first robber reached the counter, he did not think twice and opened fire on both the tellers. There was also a bullet hole behind the customer representative's desk, which suggested that the first robber tried to shoot her too but missed. Investigators also found several unfired 9mm rounds on the floor, which suggested that one of the robbers had his gun jammed during the showdown. Further analysis of the photographs showed that the robbers had two different guns, a Lorsen 380 and a 9mm. The first attempt to shoot the bank's guard was made with the Lorsen 380, but it jammed, and then he pulled out a third gun, the AR-15 assault rifle. Unfired bullets on the floor also proved the presence of all these guns at the crime scene. Next up, the investigators focused on the bank's drive-through and began piecing it together. The chaos: one of the customers tried to flee and was chased by one of the gunmen and ended up with a grazed arm, as seen by an eyewitness. The witness also reported that the guard tried his best to stop the gunman, but the combined fire of two different robbers was too much, and he ended up being struck by multiple rounds. The gunman was seen returning inside the bank using the rear door as Hartman crumbled on the floor, still alive. Both the robbers, who had remained calm for the most part, were now in panic mode. Hence, they thought getting the money and disappearing from the scene was their best bet. So they started loading up a backpack with bundles of money. With all the chaos and panic they faced, they failed to realize that one of those bundles contained a dye pack. On their way out, they were met by the bank's guard, who had some life left in him to shoot but missed. This triggered both the robbers and the lead gunman to make a run to catch the guard and kill him once and for all. He aimed and shot at his temple, which proved to be catastrophic and ended up blinding Hartman for life. Now the entire story was clear. They came with an intent to shoot everyone, so there won't be any witnesses, and take all the money they could and flee. One of the most shocking pieces of evidence found in the backpack was lighter fluid. It even made investigators shiver, as there was a possibility that the robbers could set the bank on fire. In the wake of the violent bank robbery that left the Richmond community in shock, investigators turned their attention to identifying the individuals responsible for this heinous act. As they shifted through the evidence collected from the crime scene, a key lead emerged: Jermaine Sims. Records revealed that Sims had purchased the weapons used in the robbery, making him a person of interest. Initially, Sims denied any involvement when questioned by law enforcement, but as the investigation progressed and he found himself incarcerated, his stance began to shift. After spending a week behind bars, Sims decided to cooperate with investigators. His initial denial crumbled as he confessed to knowing about the robbery and revealed that he had left his firearms with two associates, Rashi Jones and LaFawn Bobbitt. This admission marked a turning point in the investigation, as it connected directly to the violent crime. With Sims' cooperation, detectives began to unravel the identities of his accomplices. Rashi Jones and LaFawn Bobbitt were quickly identified as the key players in the robbery. Both men had criminal backgrounds that raised red flags for the investigators. Bobbitt had a history of violent offenses, while Jones was known for multiple convictions, including grand larceny. Their pasts painted a picture of individuals who were not only willing but perhaps eager to resort to violence. As detectives delved deeper into their backgrounds, they uncovered a pattern of criminal behavior that suggested that these men were not just opportunistic robbers, but rather seasoned criminals who acted with calculated intent. The evidence gathered indicated that they meticulously planned the bank heist, demonstrating a level of premeditation that was chilling. The connection between Sims and his accomplices became increasingly clear as investigators pieced together their movements leading up the robbery. They learned that Sims had supplied Bobbitt and Jones with firearms, including a Lorson 380 and 80 semi-automatic, which was later identified as the murder weapon used against Christine Edwards. A record check revealed that this particular weapon had been stolen weeks earlier, further complicating the narrative surrounding these suspects. As law enforcement began to compile their cases against Sims, Jones, and Bobbitt, they recognized that time was of the essence. The violent nature of their crimes suggested that these individuals posed an ongoing threat to the community. The urgency to apprehend them intensified, as investigators feared they might strike again if not caught quickly. With each new piece of information gathered from Sims' confession and background checks on Jones and Bobbitt, detectives felt they were getting closer to bringing these criminals to justice. However, they also felt they needed more concrete evidence, linking all three men to the robbery if they hoped to secure convictions. The investigation into Jermaine Sims and his associates would soon lead detectives down a path filled with twists and turns, revealing not only their connections to this brutal crime, but also shedding light on their motivations and future plans. As they prepared for what lay ahead, one thing was clear: capturing these armed robbers was not just about solving a case. It was about ensuring the safety of a community shaken by violence. In the aftermath of the violent bank robbery, investigators intensified their efforts to locate LaFawn Bobbitt and Rashi Jones, the two men responsible for the chaos. With Jermaine Sims cooperating and providing critical information about his associates, law enforcement turned their focus to tracking down Bobbitt first. Detectives initiated surveillance operations at Bobbitt's last known address, hoping to catch him off guard. As agents monitored the area, they received a break when they spotted Bobbitt boarding a bus. The team quickly coordinated their approach, ensuring they had backup ready to apprehend him without incident. When the bus made its next stop, agents moved in swiftly, arresting Bobbitt before he could escape. Upon searching Bobbitt's home, investigators uncovered compelling evidence linking him directly to the robbery. They found items that tied him to the crime scene, including clothing that matched descriptions from witnesses and firearms connected to the bank heist. This evidence solidified their case against him and painted a clearer picture of his involvement in the violent offense. With Bobbitt already under custody, detectives continued their search for Rashi Jones. Tips began pouring in regarding Jones' whereabouts, particularly reports of him attempting to use stained money from the robbery at local businesses. This was crucial information. It indicated not only that he was still in the area, but also that he was desperate enough to spend marked bills, which would inevitably draw attention. As investigators followed these leads, they worked tirelessly to piece together the timeline of events leading up to and following the robbery. The urgency of capturing both suspects was palpable. With each passing moment, the threat they posed to the community grew more significant. Detectives knew they were racing against time to prevent further violence from these armed criminals who had already shown their willingness to kill without hesitation. Rashie Jones was the final nail in the coffin who was still at large. So the focus shifted on apprehending Rashie Jones, the second accomplice involved in the bank robbery. With LaFawn Bobbitt already in custody, detectives prepared a strategic location to locate and arrest Jones. They identified a rundown apartment building where he was believed to be hiding. The location was known for its transient population, making it an ideal spot for someone looking to evade capture. In the days leading up to the arrest, officers meticulously planned their approach. They gathered intelligence on Jones' activities and movements, ensuring they had a solid understanding of his routine. The SWAT team was briefed on the situation, and everyone involved understood the need for caution. Jones was considered armed and dangerous. On the day of the operation, SWAT teams executed a silent entry into the apartment building. They moved in swiftly and quietly, utilizing their training to minimize noise and avoid alerting Jones to their presence. As they approached his apartment, tension filled the air. Every team member was acutely aware of the potential for violence. Upon reaching the door, officers knocked and announced their presence. When there was no response, they made the decision to breach the door. Inside, they found Jones unarmed and surprisingly compliant. He surrendered without incident, allowing law enforcement to take him into custody without any further escalation. Once in custody, investigators conducted a thorough search of Jones' apartment. They discovered evidence directly linking him to the robbery, including shoes that matched the footprints taken from the crime scene. This evidence reinforced their case against him and provided crucial details about his involvement in the crime. With both Bobbitt and Jones now in custody, investigators felt a sense of urgency as they pieced together the full scope of their criminal activities. The arrest marked a significant step forward in bringing justice for Christine Edwards and all those affected by this violence. However, detectives knew that their work was far from over. They needed to ensure that all aspects of this case were thoroughly examined before moving forward with prosecution. The legal proceedings following the violent bank robbery presented significant challenges for prosecutors. The absence of eyewitness testimonies from traumatized victims created a formidable obstacle. Many of the individuals present during the incident were too emotionally shaken to provide coherent accounts, with some suffering from PTSD in the aftermath. Christine Edwards' death had left the entire community in shock, and her surviving coworkers, though physically unharmed, were psychologically scared by the memory of the violence they had witnessed. Prosecutors faced the daunting task of building a solid case without the usual reliable stream of eyewitness testimonies. They had to rely heavily on physical evidence and circumstantial details to tie the perpetrators to the crime. The prosecution also had to address the defense's arguments that the chaos and confusion inside the bank made it difficult to identify Bobbitt and Jones as the shooters with absolute certainty. However, they had a crucial witness in Jermaine Sims, a known associate of Bobbitt and Jones, who, after his arrest, admitted to lending them the guns used in the robbery. Sims' testimony was a pivotal point for the prosecution, but it came with its challenges. He had initially denied any involvement, and the defense tried to discredit his testimony by portraying him as an unreliable witness, someone who had changed his story only to save himself from harsher penalties. Despite these efforts, Sims' confession helped connect Bobbitt and Jones to the weapons used in the crime. The physical evidence gathered by investigators became the linchpin of the case. Detectives had meticulously documented the scene, recovering spent shell casings, bullet trajectories, and items left behind by the robbers. The prosecution presented ballistics reports showing that the bullets fired inside the bank matched the guns later recovered from Bobbitt and Jones' hideout. The firearms themselves had clear links to the two men. Sims testified to supplying the weapons, and their fingerprints were found on them. Unfired shells discovered at the crime scene provided additional evidence, suggesting that one of the robbers' guns had jammed during the attack. This malfunction gave investigators another crucial clue, as they found the same type of ammunition in the robber's apartment. Furthermore, the clothes recovered from their hideout matched witness descriptions of the robbers' outfits, further tying them to the crime. One of the most incriminating pieces of evidence was the footprints left at the scene. Investigators had taken detailed impressions of the boot prints found on the bank's teller counter. These were later matched to boots found in Rashi Jones' apartment, leaving little room for doubt that he was one of the men who had stormed into the bank that day. Still, the prosecution faced an uphill battle in humanizing the victims and emphasizing the brutality of the crime without their personal testimonies. Without direct accounts from the survivors, they relied on expert witnesses, psychologists and trauma specialists, to explain the profound emotional impact the robbery had on the victims. They testified about the long-term effects of witnessing such a traumatic event, painting a picture of the psychological damage that lingered long after the physical wounds had healed. Prosecutors also presented testimony from the first responders and police officers who had arrived at the scene. Richmond police officers Michael Webb and Dave Martin provided harrowing details about their experiences. They described the chaos they had encountered, including their efforts to protect the survivors and engage the heavily armed robbers. Their accounts added a layer of urgency and danger to the prosecution's narrative, emphasizing how close the situation had come to escalating further. Additionally, the prosecution was able to bring in forensic evidence from the dye pack included in the stolen money. The robbers, in their haste to flee, had not realized they had taken a bundle of cash with a dye pack, which exploded shortly after they left the bank. Investigators traced this stained money to locations where Bobbitt and Jones had attempted to spend it, providing a clear trail of their actions after the robbery. Surveillance footage from nearby stores caught them using the marked bills, linking them directly to the stolen money. The defense team, in a desperate attempt to cast doubt, tried to argue that the forensic evidence was circumstantial and that the connection between Bobbitt, Jones, and the crime was not airtight. They pushed the narrative that Sims was framing his associates to lessen his own sentence and questioned the accuracy of the ballistics and footprint evidence. However, the volume of physical evidence was overwhelming, and the jury was presented with a detailed and methodical breakdown of how each piece fit together. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was often filled with tense moments, particularly when the families of the victims testified about the toll the crime had taken on their lives. Christine Edwards' parents were present in the courtroom every day. Tracy Freeman, though unable to speak in court due to ongoing emotional trauma, had her statement read aloud by the prosecutor, describing her fear and helplessness during the robbery. In the end, despite the defense's attempts to create doubt, the evidence was insurmountable. The guns, the stolen money, the boot prints, and the testimony of Sims all pointed to the undeniable guilt of LaFawn Bobbitt and Rashi Jones. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all charges, including first-degree murder, armed robbery, and the attempted murder of Richard Hartman, the bank's security guard who had been left permanently blinded by the attack. The sentencing phase of the trial brought another emotional wave for the victims' families. Both Bobbitt and Jones were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that offered some sense of closure to the community. While justice was served, the scars of that day remained.